Hi everyone, welcome back. This is part 2 of a 3-part series that I mentioned. So if you are watching this video first, then I will have a link to my playlist in the description box below so that you can click on that and you can look for the part 1. It doesn't actually matter which order you watch them in, but the 3 of them work together. So and the reason for that is something I mentioned before, which is the rule of 3. When you see something 3 times, then it makes the prediction more accurate. So I'm doing this as a 3-part series. All right, so the chart that I'm going to look at today is for the progress chart of the U.S. constitutional signing. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up now. All right. Okay, so this is the chart that we're going to be looking at today. So let me explain what this means. This is the chart, the birth chart of the U.S. Constitution, because it was the U.S. constitutional signing. And so that's the inner chart. That's what it looked like when they signed the Constitution. And in a sense, that was its official birthday. And this is on the outside is the progress chart, because one of my viewers asked me to do a chart for the U.S. Constitution progressed to Election Day on November 6, 2018. So, and as I've said in some of my other videos, I'm not going to explain the mathematics behind a progress chart, because if you understand, if you're familiar with this stuff and it makes sense, great. But if you don't really need to understand how we come to get this chart. We just need to understand that this is a chart that astrologers use to make predictions, particularly around the timing that things unfold. Okay, so this was really interesting when I pulled it up, because, and I'm going to look at it 2 ways. One is with the progress chart on the natal chart of the U.S. Constitution signing, so that you can see the changes that are coming about. But then I will also look at it just separate, because that tells a story in itself as well. And there are 3 things in particular that I want to mention regarding this. So the first thing we're going to look at here is the fact that on Election Day, we see here that the U.S. is having a new moon in its progress chart. And this is pretty profound, because the last new moon, I believe, was in 1989. And so, that's decades ago. And so it doesn't happen very often. So the fact that we are having a new moon in the progress chart is very profound. And because I guess that would be, almost 30 years ago. And so it doesn't happen very often. So the thing I want to talk about is, what does that mean? What does it mean to have a new moon in the progress chart? What it means is it's bringing something new. And it's interesting that it's in Taurus, because so there are multiple things we want to talk about. We want to talk about the house it's in, what does it mean when there's a new moon, and what does it mean in the sign of Taurus. And it's interesting that it is in Taurus, because Uranus is beginning its transit of Taurus, and that is a Uranus transit is usually like between 7 and 8 years. So the fact that it's going to go through Taurus means that it's going to bring changes to our economy, currency, and financial institutions. And so it's very interesting to see the fact that, especially the fact that it's coming with Election Day, this new moon in Taurus with the vertex, because the vertex is fate. it's something, it's some kind of destiny that's unfolding. So the combination of having a new moon in Taurus that is fated, in conjunction with the fact that Uranus is going to be making its 7-year transit of Taurus, which is going to bring profound changes in our economy, currency, and financial institutions. That's very synchronistic. So, so we can pretty much trust, yes, that this is definitely going to happen. We're going to see profound changes in our economy, in our currency, and in our financial institutions. And if you're wondering what that will look like, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. The last time that Uranus transited Taurus, we in this country and in the world had we went through the Great Depression. We went through the stock market collapse and the Great Depression, and then eventually things restructured, and it brought about profound changes that still impact us to this day. So that tells you how profound this can be and will be. And it's also interesting that here we see it's happening in the natal 4th house. So the 4th house rules your home, your foundation, and Taurus is all about how we live on the earth, our material wealth. So it's interesting that it's in the 4th house of home and foundation. So, so that's one of the first things that I wanted to mention. I'm going to talk about that some more, both in this video and in part 3. And then the other thing is over here in the progress chart, we see Jupiter conjunct Venus. Originally in the natal chart, it was Jupiter conjunct Juno, which I mentioned before, that Jupiter and Juno have a kind of, they have a complicated relationship. They're married, and yet it also denotes some potential for abuse. And so consider that this chart was made when, let's see, September 17th, 1787, when the Constitution was signed. And this chart, the outer chart, when Jupiter and Venus are conjunct, is for November 6, 2018. So that shows you how much things have changed, because even though Jupiter hasn't changed position except like 1 degree, probably it went retrograde and came back, but Venus, Juno isn't there anymore, isn't next to Jupiter anymore, but Venus is. So that says a lot about the change in women since 1787. We've changed from Juno, who was the wife of Jupiter in this kind of dysfunctional, sort of codependent relationship where Juno experienced some abuse in that relationship. So that's moved out, and instead now we have Venus, which is a much more liberated and powerful version of the feminine. So that's very interesting. And then, and as I mentioned in part 1, and my other midterm election video, issues around women are coming to the fore in this election. So, so that's really interesting. And then I'm also going to talk about Neptune up here. But one more point I wanted to make about this new moon here is the trine to Venus up here. So the 8th house rules joint resources, and Venus rules wealth and money and women. So when you see this new moon here in Taurus, and by the way, Venus also rules Taurus because it's all about material wealth and money. And so when you see this trining here with this new moon in Taurus in the 4th house of home and our foundation, which is like our material wealth, especially since it's Taurus, you see it making a trine to Venus up here in our 8th house of joint resources, which tells me that ultimately whatever comes from this change, although it may be disruptive, there will be a transition and it may be painful, but the ultimate outcome will be favorable because of this trine. So that's good to know. Okay, so now I'm going to shift to looking just at this chart. And so this is the chart for, this is a progress chart for the constitutional signing. And this is what I want you to see here. One of the things I want you to see is that Neptune is on the ascendant. So like I said, there were 3 things I wanted to talk about. One has to do with how we understand reality. The other is women, which I already talked about. So that won't be as much discussed in this particular video. And then the third thing is the economy, currency, and financial institutions. So those are the 3 things. 1, how we understand reality. 2, how women are treated in this country. And 3, the economy, currency, and financial institutions. All right, so let me just knock this out real quick here. When you see Jupiter conjunct Venus at the top of the chart, what that tells us is that, especially because it's connecting here with Uranus in the midheaven in the 10th house, what that's telling us with these up here is that, especially with Jupiter and Venus conjoined up here at the top of our chart, is that around the world, people still view us as the land of plenty, the land of opportunity. So while, you know, I know that obviously there are things that are not so favorable about what the U.S. has done around the world, and we do have our problems in this country, and yet overall we're still viewed very favorably around the world. And the reason why I say that is, first of all, these are the 2 benefics, and when you see them conjoined and direct at the top of the chart, that's extremely favorable. Generally, whenever I'm looking at charts for celebrities, if you see Venus and Jupiter conjoined, especially when they're direct, especially if they're either up here at the top of the chart or on the ascendant, the 2 most important positions on a chart, you know that that is someone who can expect to be wealthy and famous, and they're seen as beautiful. They're often movie stars. So, so that's considered extremely favorable. So in a sense, you could say that in our progress chart, we're like a wealthy, famous, beautiful movie star. And I know we have our downside too. Obviously, I'm not, you know, I'm not always into this rah, U.S. is the greatest country in the world. We are a great country, but we also have our problems. But what I'm saying is that overall, we actually are still viewed very favorably as the land of plenty and the land of opportunity. It may be an illusion, but that is the way we're viewed. So, I just wanted to knock that out of the way. Now I'm going to focus on this issue of Neptune on the ascendant and the other issues with the new moon in Taurus that talk about the economy, the currency, and the financial institutions. So first over here, Neptune on the ascendant and what that means, especially because, as you can see here, there's this opposition to Mercury over here. So what this tells me is this is issues around reality, the way we understand reality. And so first I want to talk about what Neptune represents. Neptune is the planet of illusion, spirituality, mysticism, and idealism. When it's in its shadow side, when it's toxic, that illusion turns into delusion, deceit, deception, misinformation, lying, propaganda, controlling people's thinking and spinning the facts. So that's the shadow side, the toxic side. And especially here where it's opposite Mercury, Mercury is how we think and communicate. So there has been a problem. And like I said, the one of the benefits of Donald Trump being president is it's become more open. Like we can see it, like it's not hidden anymore. You know, like in the past, presidents were very good at keeping the fact that they weren't necessarily being honest, but they hid it, you know. They were much better at cloaking it. And now it's just all out in the open. Donald Trump's just made it all out in the open so we can see it for what it is. And so that's really important, to be able to see what's happening so that we can then change it. So once you go through the downside, now Neptune on the ascendant means dissolution. So that means something is dissolving, something is changing. It's a dissolution of the old and the status quo and the arising of something new, which is interesting because it's also, we're seeing the new moon. So there's a dissolution of something old and the status quo and bringing of something new. Now, it's not going to happen overnight just because we have an election. These processes take time to work out. And I would say because of the Uranus transit of Taurus, expect this whole thing to unfold to take at least 7 years, okay? It's not going to happen overnight just because of an election. It's just saying that this is like a timing trigger with the new moon that just happens to also be happening at that time of the midterm elections. So, so like I said, Neptune on the ascendant means dissolution. So something is dissolving, the old is dissolving, the status quo is dissolving, something new is coming in. So we've been dealing with issues in the shadow, in Neptune's shadow and its toxic side, and how our minds, the way we think, the way we communicate has been in opposition to Neptune and its shadow, its toxicity, with the delusion, the deceit, the deception, misinformation, lying, propaganda, controlling people's thinking and spinning of the facts. And this is the issue that we need to deal with. Okay, so so this has to do with how we understand reality, and I want to talk about this both in terms of a personal understanding of reality and a collective understanding of reality, or what we might call a shared reality. So I want to mention that I wrote a book, The Power of Manifestation, Creating a Life You Love, and this is actually about the concept of how, if you understand how you create your personal reality, you can manifest. You can develop this power of manifestation and creating a life you love. So, so it talks about personal reality, how we create our personal reality. We also have to consider that we have a collective reality as well. We have a shared reality. And that's what's really problematic here with the Neptune on the ascendant opposite Mercury, is that we're in the toxic side right now. We actually don't really have a shared reality now. That's what, because this is the process of Neptune. It starts out in its shadow, in its toxicity, and then as it dissolves, it releases the releases the bindings. So we become unbound, untethered. And that process can be freeing. That process of dissolution can be freeing, but it also can be very disturbing. Any kind of transformation, transition can be very difficult and disturbing. And that's the process that we're going through now. The old is being dissolved. The old way of, the politicians lied to us all the time. I mean, that was the status quo. And that's why people got fed up. And that's why people rebel, and they're tired of it. And so the interesting thing about Donald Trump coming into the fore is that he's making it more obvious. It's the fact that this has been happening. It's been happening a long time, but now it's more obvious with Donald Trump. So that's part of the dissolution, is it's breaking our bindings. We're like no longer under the control of this deceit and this deception, because you know, I mean, plenty of politicians and presidents have done this for a very, very long time. But this is the first time that we're really starting to see it for what it is. And that's part of the dissolution process and dissolving the bindings. It's dissolving. It's like if that deceit and that deception and misinformation and lying and everything was like a veil over our eyes, we were being lied to, and kind of we knew it, but we also kind of couldn't see it, you know, like, I don't know, they were just really good at it before. But now it's just so open. And that's part of the dissolution, of like took the veil away so we can see it for what it is. Like I said, the emperor's new clothes, it's all naked now. So that's part of the dissolution. That's going to take us from the toxic side of things to the dissolving of the status quo and the way things have always been done before, into something new. And the new is understanding how we shape our reality, that everything is a story. That instead of being locked into and attached to a specific story, a specific way of viewing the world as right versus wrong, instead we can understand that it's just the way we look at things and the way we talk about things. So, and I got a real good taste of this recently within the past month when I moved to Florida. I stayed for a few days with my aunt in Texas, and so, you know, this is the heart of Trump territory and the Bible Belt, and she's a Republican and she's a Baptist, and at her house, I was there for 3 full days, but overall maybe coming and going about 5 days. And in her house, Fox News was on all the time. And when the television wasn't on, it was always on Fox News, then she had the radio on, and she had the system that played throughout her entire house. And she played this channel, talk radio channel that had Rush Limbaugh. So for 3 days, I was immersed in this, like there was nowhere to escape. And I, you know, she's my aunt, so I didn't want to be rude or anything. You know, this is her home, and she invited me and she hosted me in my visit, and she loves me, and you know, I love her in spite of the fact that we don't necessarily agree on politics. But to be immersed in that for 3 days was fascinating, because what I came to understand, you know, like especially on the left, you know, if you there are certain news stations where we tend to get our news, and it's in alignment with our values, and they're showing us the facts that we want to hear. We want to know about, you know, what's going on with this FBI investigation and the Russian interference and all of that. And so that's where we get our news, so that we can get that information that we're looking for, which is factual. It's just that the other side of it, like if you're watching Fox News, is that they're actually showing you different facts. They're all facts. I'm not saying that Fox News is lying, and, you know, the other channels like MSNBC and CNN, I'm not saying that they're lying. I'm not saying that they are giving us fake news. It's just that the facts that they choose to show us shape a particular narrative. And that's what we're beginning to understand about reality, is that in terms of the kind of information that we choose to look at, it's still factual. But when you only look at certain information, it shapes your reality. It shapes the story, the narrative. So while I was there, it was the hearings for the Kavanaugh confirmation, and Dr. Ford was talking about what happened, and then two other women came forward, and they also had claims. And what was interesting is that on Fox News, the way it was portrayed was that Kavanaugh was just this wonderful person. How could these people possibly be saying these things? And the Democrats are obviously, they've gone off their rocker. They're so desperate. They'll do anything, you know. And since I know from, I didn't have access to any other news source at that time, but I know that there was a very different narrative, because the other channels were focusing on facts as well, but different facts. They were looking and taking Dr. Ford's claims seriously, you know, what she went through. And Fox News was only looking at all the people who think Kavanaugh is wonderful, and, you know, and how the Democrats must be desperate. And it was a totally different shaping of reality. And so what was so fascinating to me about that was that I finally understood, because I couldn't understand, like, how can these people believe Trump? I mean, all you have to do is listen to his own words. He's lying all the time. How can they buy into this? But when I was watching, when I was in her home, and so I was exposed to and immersed in the Fox News narrative, then I understood. It's like they only show you clips where Donald Trump sounds sane. And if that's all you hear, then you think he is sane. So, you know, it's like I started to actually think, wow, maybe he's not so bad. And, you know, maybe the Democrats are kind of desperate, you know? And then I got out of that and I was like, wow, that was fascinating, because they don't talk about the FBI investigation. For them, the narrative, that just like doesn't really even exist. It's like it's not even happening. And it's just fascinating. And I think really that Fox News is the representation of the old way of doing things. It's the status quo, you know. Always make the president look fabulous. Never tell the truth about what's really going on behind the scenes. And so this is such a change that we actually have a news media now that is willing to dig deep and really look at what's going on behind the scenes. So, but either way you look at it, it's just the way we shape reality. And in this country, we don't have shared reality right now. You know, some people, if they're getting their news from a certain source, they have a certain reality and they feel safe. And then other people watch different news media. They're getting facts too, but different facts. And so they have a different narrative, and there's no shared reality. And so what we need to understand is that it's not about the external reality, because they're all looking at facts. It's about how we look at the facts and how we shape reality, and which facts we're willing to look at and which facts we're not willing to look at. Climate change is another example of that. So, so we're going to begin to understand more and more about how that happens, that we will understand that there is no objective reality, other than the simplest facts, such as Trump is the 45th president. That's the most basic. Everything else is just this spinning of the story, the reality. And we're going to begin to understand that more and more. So that's part of the dissolution, is learning how to break the binds of that story, that web, that fabric of reality that is always being woven, to be able to break the binds and to see how that's being done to our minds. So So I think that's one of the most important things of Neptune on the ascendant. And as this Mercury moves out of opposition, it will take years. This is not going to happen overnight. It's a process of years. We'll begin to understand that more and more, how that's been done to us. So that's the most important thing about this chart. But I do want to talk a little bit more about this new moon conjunct the vertex up here in the 8th house in the sign of Taurus and what that means. So as I said, this relates to, this is the house of joint resources, and it's in Taurus. So this will relate to something new coming regarding the economy, currency, and financial institutions. And also notice here how it's squaring Pluto down here. Pluto is wealth and power, and it's in the 5th house of creativity, and it's in the sign of Aquarius, which is Aquarius rules humanity, humanitarian causes, and technology. But notice that these are squaring. So there's going to be kind of a jarring, like facing off, squaring off, some pressure. The changes are not going to be easy, okay? So I want to talk about what I think that's going to look like, and why it's going to be difficult, and what the ultimate changes might bring. So in terms of the changes we see here, I think one of them is going to be the impact of technology, which we've already been seeing, because we now have this thing called the gig economy. And so we're going to see more and more of this. Technology increasing, having an impact on the economy, and pushing more and more into people in the gig economy. So the gig economy will grow stronger, more people in it, more cottage industries, more working at home, using internet and other technologies in our personal economics, in our personal businesses, more entrepreneurialism. Now, these are all good things, people bringing their creativity to the fore, more entrepreneurialism, more cottage industries. Those are all good things, but there's also a downside. And so one of the things that this has brought, that these changes of technology in the gig economy, what they're bringing is problems with unemployment. And so there's also been deception around how we measure unemployment. So that goes back to this thing, the toxic side of Neptune here. There's deception around how we measure unemployment in this country. And I've mentioned in some of my other videos, but I'll say it again now. I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Denver in political science and economics. And I graduated cum laude with honors in economics. And then I went on for a master's degree in economics at the University of Denver. So, so I understand how they measure unemployment. And I also understand it's very deceptive, because what they're measuring are people on unemployment, people who are getting unemployment benefits. And so as people go off the unemployment rolls, it makes it look like there's less unemployment, so that unemployment numbers go down. That doesn't necessarily mean that just because people aren't collecting unemployment benefits that they have solved their unemployment problems. A lot of them may still be unemployed, or because they don't want to end up homeless and on the streets, they may turn to the gig economy. And like I said, there can be benefits in that, but there are also downsides. They may actually get a job but be underemployed and receiving a lower income than they can really afford to live on, and are taking part-time work. So they're either still unemployed or they find ways to create income, but the problem is that they're underemployed and they're not making enough money. So it's still a problem. but that's not being measured. So when you see these numbers coming out like lowest unemployment, that is just a flat out lie. It does not tell you what's going on in the actual economy with people on the ground and what their lives are like. There are a lot of people in this country who are struggling. And unfortunately, because of technology, the benefits of technology, this is actually the problem is going to become greater and greater and greater. And that's why we're going to have to deal with this. This is going to bring new changes in the economy, in currency, and in financial institutions. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a bit of a struggle because of the changes being brought about with wealth and power related to technology and how that impacts the economy and joint resources. So, so the question is like, how are we going to solve this problem? And I think that what we're going to see over the 7 years, especially with Uranus in Taurus, is we're going to see definitely changes in the economy. And I do think we'll see more independent employment, like the gig economy, entrepreneurialism, cottage industries, using these technologies in our personal businesses. And so some of that will be good, but we're also going to have to find other ways to deal with resource distribution, because the way that resources are being accumulated and distributed are going to be problematic with the changes in technology. And we need more and better distribution. Otherwise, people are just going to be worse and worse off. So resource distribution will be an important issue. And that means universal health care, universal income. That means distribution of food and housing. That's what I mean when I say universal income. That there'll be like a standard, a basic standard for people to be able to get health care, education, food, housing, transportation, all of those things. But there's another side of it. And this is the last point I want to make, but I have to mention this, which is if you start talking about resource distribution, which is essential, and that's what this is about, and the changes that technology and the resource distribution is going to bring to our economy and our currency and our financial institutions. And if you want to talk about resource distribution in terms of universal health care and universal income, then we have to be willing to talk about population control. And that's the direction, okay? So we can't talk about resource distribution without talking honestly about population growth. And there are two sides to population growth. One is the immigration, and one is the family planning. Those are the two sides of population growth: immigration and family planning. And the truth is that this has been so divisive in this country. This is one of the basic problems. Democrats don't really like to talk about immigration, and Republicans don't like to talk about family planning. And that's why on the right, you see immigration has become such a hot potato issue. Like there's so much anger around it, and it's become a scapegoat. It's become vilified, and part of that's because Democrats aren't willing to talk with Republicans. There's this right, wrong. No, we're right. You're wrong. No, we're right. You're wrong. And they're not willing to talk about it. And so we end up with things out of balance because there isn't some open, honest discussions around immigration. But the same with family planning, that Republicans don't want to talk honestly about family planning, and until we're willing to talk about these issues of population growth, we will not be able to deal with the issues of resource distribution. And I think that's exactly what this is about. And like I said, the timing is so interesting because of the fact that this new moon in the progress chart in Taurus in the 8th house is exact. And the timing is the election, the midterm elections. So this is kind of like a kickoff point. It's like astrology is like a clock and a calendar, and it tells you the timing of things when things are kicked off. So that's what I think this chart is telling us, especially because this is a chart for the midterm elections on November 6th, 2018. All right, so that brings the second part of this 3-part series to a close. And so I just want to reiterate very quickly that there are 3 primary issues. One is the treatment of women. So we're seeing changes around that. The second is the whole thing about how we understand reality, how reality is created, and how it's become more obvious now that the way that that's done to us. And we're going to start to take more control over how we create reality, how we understand the way it's created. And thirdly, issues around changes in the economy, currency, and financial institutions. So in terms of how it relates to the other chart with the North Node moving into Donald Trump's 12th house, Neptune on the ascendant is about dissolution, and it is the ruler of the 12th house. So it talks about the dissolution. It's the ruler of the 12th house of endings, dissolution, bringing dissolution to the old, letting go, releasing those old bindings, and then the birth of something new. And when we go through this process, this evolutionary process of our consciousness, we will eventually be able to move toward our ideal. That is what Neptune does. It starts with the shadow side, and then the dissolution, and then eventually taking us to our ideal. But we have to go through that process first. All right, so I hope that was interesting. I know it's pretty complicated, but I think it's really important to understand these issues and to be able to talk about them intelligently. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, I am going to do a 3rd video, which will be the 3rd part of this 3-part series. And it's all related to the upcoming midterm elections and the changes that we're going to see that are kicked off at that point in time. All right, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.